of William Barr. Well, let's get back to business as usual. And we haven't read from this book in about a week or so. So much else going on. So I'll remind you, this is the book War Against the Weak by Edwin Black. And we're about halfway through the book now in the chapter called Rasse und Blut, Race and Blood. And we have just been talking about the European eugenics movement and how it really gets its information and beginnings and all of the data and everything from Cold Spring Harbor. Cold Spring Harbor, home of the Carnegie Institution, and Carnegie being a British agent here to help destroy America. How better to destroy America than to divide us up into races and convince us that some are better than others? Well, that's certainly one of the ways. Okay, let's get back into our book now. We're now beginning to talk about Hitler and the German eugenics movement. So here we go. The intellectual outlines of the eugenics Hitler adopted in 1924 were strictly American. He merely compounded all the virulence of long-established American race science with his fantastic anti-Jewish rage. Hitler's extremist eugenic science, which in many ways seemed like the logical extension of America's own entrenched programs and advocacy, eventually helped shape the institutions and even the machinery of the Third Reich's genocide. By the time Hitler's concept of Aryan superiority emerged, his politics had completely fused into a biological and eugenic mindset. When Hitler used the term master race, he meant just that, a biological master race. America crusaded for a biologically superior race, which would gradually wipe away the existence of all inferior strains. Hitler would crusade for a master race to quickly dominate all others. In Hitler's view, eugenically inferior groups such as Poles and Russians would be permitted to exist, but were destined to serve Germany's master race. Hitler demonized the Jewish community as social, political, and racial poison, that is, a biological menace. He vowed that the Jewish community would be neutralized, dismantled, and removed from Europe. Nazi eugenics would ultimately dictate who would be persecuted, how people would live, and how they would die. Nazi doctors would become the unseen generals in Hitler's war against the Jews and other Europeans deemed inferior. Doctors would create the science, devise the eugenic formulas, write the legislation, and even hand-select the victims for sterilization, euthanasia, and mass extermination. Hitler's deputy, Rudolf Hess, coined a popular adage in the Reich: "National Socialism is nothing but applied biology," quote unquote. While in prison at his, quote, university, Hitler codified his madness in the book Mein Kampf, which he dictated to Hess. He also read the second edition of the first great German eugenics text, Foundation of Human Heredity and Race Hygiene, which had been published in 1921. Germany's three leading race eugenicists, Erwin Bauer, Fritz Lenz, and Eugen Fischer, authored the two-volume set. All three of the book's authors were closely allied to American eugenic science and Davenport personally. Their eugenics originated at Cold Spring Harbor. Bauer, an intense racist, closely studied American eugenics science and formulated his ideas accordingly. He was comfortable confiding to his dear friend Davenport just how those ideas fused with nationalism. For example, in November of 1920, about a year before Foundation of Human Heredity and Race Hygiene went to press, Bauer wrote to Davenport in almost perfect English, quote, "The medical division of the Prussian government has asked me to prepare a review of the eugenical laws and Vorschriften, regulations, that is, which have already been introduced into the different states of your country." Except for he said differed states of your country. He emphasized, of especial interest are the marriage certificates, certificates of health required for marriage, laws forbidding marriage of heredity-burdened persons, among others. Heredity-burdened, isn't that a curious phrase? And further, the experiments made in different states with castration of criminals and insane. It has to resonate, when you read that you're going to need a special license, that you are okay to get married. And, it sounds to me like a racial health certificate, which might very much seem the same function as a COVID health certificate. It is at present extraordinarily difficult here in Germany to gather together the desired material about U.S. legislation, Bauer continued. I am thinking, however, that perhaps in your institute, that is the Carnegie Institution, all this material has been already gathered, that perhaps there may be some recent printed report on the matter. If my idea is correct, I would be exceedingly thankful to you if you could help me with a collection of the material. Bauer then bitterly complained about the confiscatory war reparations under the Treaty of Versailles, and the presence of French and Belgian African troops as enforcers. Quote, "The entire work of eugenics is very difficult with us," Bauer reported. Quote, "All children in the cities are entirely insufficiently nourished. Everywhere milk and fat are lacking. And this matter will become yet greater if we shall now give up to France and Belgium the milk cows which they have requisitioned for war reparations. The entirely unnecessary huge army of occupation eats us poor, but eugenically the worst is what we call the black shame, the French Negro regiments, which are placed all over Germany, and which in the most shameful fashion give free rein to their impulses toward women and children. By force and by money they secure their victims. Each French Negro soldier has, at our expense, a greater income than a German professor, and the consequence is a frightful increase of syphilis and a mass of mulatto children. Even if all French-Belgian tales of mishandling by German soldiers were true, they have been 10 times exceeded by what now, in peace, happens on German soil. But I have wandered far from my theme," Bauer continued. "We have under the new government an advisory commission for race hygiene, which will in the future pass upon all new bills from the eugenical standpoint. It is for this commission that I wish to prepare the Referate, or reports, on American eugenic laws." Barr added that the Carnegie researcher Alfred Blakesley's paper is in press for publication in Germany. The plate was at the lithographer's. Bauer was one of the principal German scientists Davenport had implored to join the International Eugenics Commission. Bauer's co-author, Fritz Lenz, like many German eugenicists, was long an aficionado of American sterilization. He lectured German audiences that they were lagging far behind America. Like Bauer, Lenz was among the German eugenic leaders Davenport beckoned to join him at the helm of world eugenics. Lenz reluctantly refused Davenport's entreaties to attend either an international commission or Congress, and in 1923 candidly declared to Davenport, quote, "Europe goes with rapid steps toward a new, frightful war, in which Germany will chiefly participate. That is the position in Europe, and therefore I do not believe the time for international congresses has arrived, so long as France occupies the Ruhr, that is, not before the Second World War. I do not wish this certainly. I know our race in it would suffer more heavily than in the past World War, but it cannot be avoided." That's something to read from 1923, right? Predicting a war that won't start for 15 years. Lenz suggested to Davenport that while he could not participate in international gatherings, German and American eugenics could and should continue to advance eugenic science between them, mainly by corresponding. California eugenic leader Popenoe had already established a vigorous exchange with Lenz. Lenz wanted such bilateral contact extended to the ERO as well. "I would be thankful," he wrote to Davenport, "if I also could secure the publication of the Eugenics Record Office in order to notice them in our archive. I have much missed the bulletins of these last years." Lenz closed his letters with the hope of a work of mutual service. Lenz later predicted the next round in the 1,000-year fight for the life of the Nordic race will probably be fought in America. The third co-author of Foundation of Human Heredity and Race Hygiene was Eugen Fischer, a Carnegie Institution, quote, corresponding scientist. Since 1904, Fischer was a close colleague of Davenport's, and they would form an international eugenic partnership that would last years. The two-volume Foundation of Human Heredity and Race Hygiene that Hitler studied focused heavily on American eugenic principles and examples. The book's short bibliography and footnotes listed an abundance of American writers and publications, including the Journal of Heredity, various bulletins of the Eugenics Record Office, Popenoe's Applied Eugenics, Dugdale's The Jukes, Goddard's The Kallikak Family, and Davenport's own three books, Heredity in Relation to Eugenics, The Hill Folk, and the NAMS, N-A-M-S. Of course, the Bauer-Fischer-Lenz work also featured themes and references from von Hofmann's Racial Hygiene in the United States and Hitler's favorite, Madison Grant's The Passing of the Great Race. Live chat is great. Hey guys, I see. Thank you so much for the super chat. Promote our live chats to the guests. Yeah, if you mean like Harley and all, yeah. I don't know. I mean, yeah, this is kind of crazy, Corky. With Corky Goss in the chat, I'm not sure whether it's ready for. Well, I'm just kidding. Don't you feel a little better tonight? You know, with knowing that Bill Barr's on his way out the door. I mean, I almost danced a jig, but I played one. The Bauer, Fisher, Lenz volumes also included repeated explorations and reiterations of American eugenics issues. World War I U.S. Army testing had revealed that, quote, the high percentage of blue eyes among recruits is remarkable. The authors then noted the decline of blue-eyed men since the trait was measured in Civil War recruits. The anthropological fine points of American immigration were probed. For example, Fisher wrote, in the children of Jews we have immigrated from Eastern or Central Europe to the United States. The skulls are narrower than those of their broad-skulled parents, and this comparative narrowness is more marked in proportion to the number of years they have elapsed since the migration. Sicilians acquire somewhat broader heads in the United States, unquote. Repeated references to American Indian, Negro, and Jewish characteristics were liberally sprinkled throughout the volumes. They also included information on the Eugenics Records Office and Indiana's pioneering sterilization doctor, Harry Clay Sharp. The Bauer, Fisher, Lenz volumes were well received in Cold Spring Harbor. Davenport promised he would write a review for Eugenical News. Both Eugenical News and Journal of Heredity ran favorable reviews of each subsequent revised edition. One of Popenoe's reviews in Journal of Heredity, this one in 1923, lauded the work as, quote, worthy of the best traditions of German scholarship and to be warmly recommended, unquote. Popenoe especially praised Lenz's 16-point program, which outlined plans to cut off defective lines of descent and the, quote, protection of the Nordic race, unquote. It was no accident that Hitler read Foundation of Human Heredity and Race Hygiene. It was published by Julius Lehmann of Lehmann's Verlag. That's Lehmann, very familiar name in American politics going back a long ways, and especially in the southern side in the Civil War. Julius Lehmann of Lehmann's Verlag, Germany's foremost eugenic publishing house. Someone at Lehmann's happily reported to Lenz that Hitler had read the book. Lehmann's Verlag also published Plutz's Archiv für Rassen und Gesellschaftsbiologie, the Monatsschrift für Kriminalbiologie, try to read these in English, the Monthly Journal of Criminal Biology, and von Hoffman's Racial Hygiene in the United States. The year after Hitler was imprisoned, Lehmann published the German translation of Grant's The Passing of the Great Race. Julius Lehmann was not just a publisher with a proclivity for race biology. He was a shoulder-to-shoulder co-conspirator with Hitler during the 1923 beer hall putsch, and was at Hitler's side on November 8, 1923, when the National Socialists launched their abortive coup against the Bavarian government. After the beer hall ruckus, Bavarian officials were held hostage at Lehmann's ornate villa until the uprising was suppressed. As the revolt collapsed, Lehmann, a financial supporter as well as a friend, convinced the Nazi guards to allow their captives to escape rather than execute them. Lehmann was the connection between the theory of the Society for Racial Hygiene and the actions of militants such as the Nazis. Hitler openly displayed his eugenic orientation and thorough knowledge of American eugenics in much of his writing and conversation. For example, in Mein Kampf, he declared, "The demand that defective people be prevented from propagating equally defective offspring is a demand of the clearest reason and, if systematically executed, represents the most humane act of mankind. It will spare millions of unfortunates undeserved sufferings and consequently will lead to a rising improvement of health as a whole." Hitler mandated in Mein Kampf that, quote, "the people's state must set race in the center of all life. It must take care to keep it pure. It must see to it that only the healthy beget children, that there is only one disgrace, despite one's own sickness and deficiencies, to bring children into the world. It must put the most modern medical means in the service of this knowledge. It must declare unfit for propagation all who are in any way visibly sick or who have inherited a disease, and can therefore pass it on, and put this into actual practice. Hitler railed against, quote, the bourgeois national society, to whom the prevention of the procreative faculty in sufferers from syphilis, tuberculosis, hereditary diseases, cripples, and cretins is a crime, a prevention of the faculty and opportunity to procreate on the part of the physically degenerate and mentally sick over a period of only 600 years would not only free humanity from an immeasurable misfortune, but would lead to a recovery which today seems scarcely conceivable. The result will be a race which at least will have eliminated the germs of our present physical and hence spiritual decay. Repeating standard American eugenic notions on hybridization, Hitler observed, any crossing of two beings not at exactly the same level produces a medium between the level of the two parents. This means the offspring will probably stand higher than the racially lower person, but not as high as the higher one. Such mating is contrary to the will of nature for a higher breeding of all life. In some cases, Hitler's eugenics writings resembled passages from Grant's The Passing of the Great Race. Grant wrote, quote, speaking English, wearing good clothes, and going to school and to church do not transform a Negro into a white man. Nor was a Syrian or Egyptian freedman transformed into a Roman by wearing a toga and applauding his favorite gladiator in the amphitheater, unquote. In a similar vein, Hitler wrote, But it is a scarcely conceivable fallacy of thought to believe that a Negro or a Chinese, let us say, will turn into a German because he learns German and is willing to speak the German language in the future, and perhaps even give his vote to a German political party. He also noted, surely no one will call the purely external fact that most of this lice-ridden, that is, Jewish, migration from the East speaks German a proof of their German origin and nationality. Grant wrote, What the melting pot actually does in practice can be seen in Mexico, where the absorption of the blood of the original Spanish conquerors by the native Indian population has produced the racial mixture which we call Mexican, and which is now engaged in demonstrating its incapacity for self-government. The world has seen many such mixtures, and the character of a mongrel race is only just beginning to be understood at its true value. In a similar vein, Hitler wrote, North America, whose population consists in by far the largest part of Germanic elements who mixed but little with the lower-colored peoples, shows a different humanity and culture from Central and South America, where the predominantly Latin immigrants often mixed with the Aborigines on a large scale. Mein Kampf also displayed a keen familiarity with the recently passed U.S. National Origins Act, which called for eugenic quotas. There is today one state in which at least weak beginnings toward a better conception of immigration are noticeable. Of course, it is not our model German Republic, but the United States, in which an effort is made to consult reason, at least partially, by refusing immigrants on principle to elements in poor health, by simply excluding certain races from naturalization. It professes, in slow beginnings, a view which is peculiar to the people's state. In page after page of Mein Kampf's rantings, Hitler recited social Darwinism imperatives, condemned the concept of charity, and praised the policies of the United States and its quest for Nordic purity. Perhaps no passage better summarized Hitler's views than this from chapter 11. The Germanic inhabitants of the American continent the Germanic inhabitant of the American continent who has remained racially pure and unmixed, rose to be master of the continent. He will remain the master as long as he does not fall a victim to the defilement of the blood. Hitler proudly told his comrades just how closely he followed the American eugenics legislation. Quote, "Now that we know the laws of heredity," he told a fellow Nazi, "it is possible to a large extent to prevent unhealthy and severely handicapped beings from coming into the world. I have studied with great interest the laws of several American states concerning prevention of reproduction by people whose progeny would, in all probability, be of no value or be injurious to the racial stock. But the possibility of excess and error is still no proof of the incorrectness of these laws. It only exhorts us to the greatest possible conscientiousness. It seems to me the ultimate in hypocrisy and inner untruth if these same people, social critics, and it is them in the main, call the sterilization of those who are severely handicapped physically and morally, and of those who are genuinely criminal, a sin against God. I despise this sanctimoniousness." Reflecting upon the race mixing caused by occupying French African troops and his hopes for Nordic supremacy, Hitler later told one reporter, "One eventually reaches the conclusions that masses of men are mere biological plasticine, i.e. clay. We will not allow ourselves to be turned into," and then he uses the N-word, "as the French tried to do after 1918. The Nordic blood available in England, northern France, and North America will eventually go with us to reorganize the world." Moreover, as Hitler's knowledge of American pedigree techniques broadened, he came to realize that even he might have been eugenically excluded. In later years, he conceded at a dinner engagement, "I was shown a questionnaire drawn up by the Ministry of the Interior, which it was proposed to put to people whom it was deemed desirable to sterilize. At least 3/4 of the questions asked would have defeated my own good mother. If this system had been introduced before my birth, I'm pretty sure I should never have been born at all." Unquote. Nor did Hitler fail to grasp the eugenic potential of gas and the lethal chamber. 4 years before Mein Kampf was written, a psychiatrist and a judge published their treatise, Permission to Destroy Life Unworthy of Life, which insisted that the medical killing of the unfit, such as the feeble-minded, was society's duty. But the extermination had to be overseen by doctors. Several subsequent publications endorsed the same view, making the topic au courant in German eugenic circles. Hitler, who had himself been hospitalized for battlefield gas injuries, wrote about gas in Mein Kampf. Quote, "If at the beginning of the war and during the war 12 or 15,000 of these Hebrew corrupters of the people had been held under poison gas, as happened to hundreds of thousands of our best German workers in the field, the sacrifices of millions on the front would not have been in vain. On the contrary, 12,000 scoundrels eliminated in time might have saved the lives of 1 million real Germans, valuable for the future." On January 30th, 1933, Adolf Hitler seized power following an inconclusive election. That's a little creepy too, isn't it? During the 12-year Reich, he never varied from the eugenic doctrines of identification, segregation, sterilization, euthanasia, eugenic courts, and eventually mass termination of germ plasm in lethal chambers. During the Reich's first 10 years, eugenicists across America welcomed Hitler's plans as the logical fulfillment of their own decades of research and effort. Indeed, they were envious as Hitler rapidly began sterilizing hundreds of thousands and systematically eliminating non-Aryans from German society. This included the Jews. 10 years after Virginia passed in 1924 its 1924 Sterilization Act, Joseph DeJarnette, superintendent of Virginia's Western State Hospital, complained in the Richmond Times-Dispatch, quote, "The Germans are beating us at our own game," unquote. Most of all, American raceologists were intensely proud to have inspired the purely eugenic state the Nazis were constructing. In those early years of the Third Reich, Hitler and his race hygienists carefully crafted eugenic legislation modeled on laws already introduced across America, upheld by the Supreme Court, and routinely enforced. Nazi doctors and even Hitler himself regularly communicated with American eugenicists from New York to California, ensuring that Germany would scrupulously follow the path blazed by the United States. American eugenicists were eager to assist. As they followed the day-to-day progress of the Third Reich, American eugenicists clearly understood their continuing role. Quote, their continuing role. This was particularly true of California's eugenicists, who led the nation in sterilization and provided the most scientific support for Hitler's regime. In 1934, as Germany's sterilization laws were accelerating beyond 5,000 per month, my eyes are tricking me tonight. In 1934, as Germany's sterilizations were accelerating beyond 5,000 per month, the California eugenic leader and immigration activist C.M. Goethe was ebullient in congratulating E.S. Gosney of the San Diego-based Human Betterment Foundation for his impact on Hitler's work. Upon his return in 1934 from a eugenic fact-finding mission in Germany, Goethe wrote Gosney a letter of praise. The Human Betterment Foundation was so proud of Goethe's letter that they reprinted it in their 1935 annual report. Quote, "You will be interested to know," Goethe's letter proclaimed, "that your work has played a powerful part in shaping the opinions of the group of intellectuals who are behind Hitler in this epoch-making program. Everywhere I sensed that their opinions have been tremendously stimulated by American thought, and particularly by the work of the Human Betterment Foundation. I want you, my dear friend, to carry this thought with you for the rest of your life, that you have really jolted into action a great government of 60 million people." So I think our author has made his case that the eugenics movement, which started in Great Britain but got its scientific quote-unquote backing much more in America at Cold Spring Harbor and in California and the people surrounding Stanford and the Goethe and the other people in California that really were pioneers for Hitler's own race laws. It's not enough to say that American racism influenced the creation of the Fourth Reich. We have to be more specific. This is not the American people being racist. These are these pseudo-intellectual, paid mercenary scribblers to take a word from maybe the 18th century, scribblers who are paid basically to write this nonsense and create facts that support their theories, dress it up as science, and then give it back to the money people that want to reduce the population, to get rid of the inferior races that they've judged themselves to be so superior to, and to have it all be legal. Eugenics is the word. We now call it genetics or gene science. But when we consider what's going on with these weaponized biological creatures, viruses, etc., we have to realize that this is the product of these insane but highly connected and extremely wealthy racists, all connected to Great Britain, Wall Street, the Boston Brahmins, and then, of course, the Europeans that follow that race idea. So America has to take responsibility now that we see the origins of eugenics as being the origins of the Holocaust, and continued efforts on behalf of people such as the Rockefeller Foundation to eliminate people from the earth that they do not find to be worthy of continuation. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow morning. We're going to keep on following very closely what's happening in the news. Follow Neighborhood News Studio. Follow Mark over at Housatonic Live. And the great reporting of Bill Taylor at Deep State Analytics. What else can I say except for the truth train is still rolling, and it's a very, very powerful train indeed. Thanks again. Good night.